I'll be leading most of the presentation today, and then I'm here with Marc Friedmann, who is my co-leader of our IT sector team within our organization. And just a little bit about my background. I live in the Bay Area in California, in Los Altos. I had about a 30-plus year career in mostly high tech, some medical technology, a little bit of nonprofit, and have been, I stopped working for pay about a decade ago, and have been working or volunteering primarily in the climate arena for that period of time. So Marc, you want to give a quick intro?
Sure. Yeah, I have a background in technology and software. I've been CEO of 3 software companies. Most of my career was in early stage companies, a lot of startups, some of which I did on my own from scratch, and then ran others. For the last dozen years or so, I've been focused on advising early stage companies, mostly in the software space, and several including those focused in the clean tech area. So energy efficiency, solar firms, microgrids, wind turbines. I've had clients in all those areas, which has me interested and familiar with what's going on with climate change.
Great. Thank you very much. So we're excited to be here to talk with you today about carbon pricing, and in particular around the business case for carbon pricing. I probably don't need to spend a lot of time talking with people about the climate crisis and all of the indicators of that. Some of us were just talking at the beginning of the call about those of us who are here in the Bay Area have just experienced, just to make it abundantly clear, record temperatures over the last 4 or 5 days. It was 108 here in Los Altos, the hottest day on record, 121 in LA County. We have wildfires all around us in the Bay Area, so we've had horrible air quality for some time. And those, of course, are just a couple of the indicators and outcomes from the increasing climate crisis that we're experiencing. So our agenda for today, I want to talk a little bit about the organizations that we are part of. They're actually one and the same. Citizens Climate Lobby is the umbrella organization. And then Marc and I are part of Business Climate Leaders Action Team. I'll talk a little bit about that. And we're going to talk about a bill that is in Congress called it's in the House right now in the US, Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividends Act. Then we're going to talk a little more specifically about the business case for carbon pricing for IT companies. And then we're going to have Q&A, and then we'll do breakouts. So let's get rolling through those. Citizens Climate Lobby is about an 11-year-old nonprofit organization. We have over 200,000 members. Most are in the United States, but we're also in 32 other countries around the world. Really emphasize the fact that we're a nonpartisan organization and nonprofit. We're very solution focused. We are for a specific solution as opposed to against things. And that solution, as I mentioned, is called the Energy Innovation Act. We also have a strong set of values with a particular emphasis on respect, appreciation, and gratitude for all those that we interact with. We're very active. We have 556 US chapters. We have chapters in every single congressional district. And then we have, I think, between 100 and 150 chapters around the world. Very active in Canada, quite a few in the UK and Europe, but also in many other countries around the world. So the business climate leaders, and by the way, I should say that for CCL, Citizens Climate Lobby, the CCL's focus for its entire 11 years has been singularly focused on passing federal carbon pricing legislation. And probably 7 or 8 years ago, we developed a particular solution called carbon fee and dividend. And that's what we've been advocating for this entire time. And about 2 years ago, that was finally embodied in this bill called the Energy Innovation Bill. And that it's almost identical to our original carbon fee and dividend policy. And I'll get into the details on that. So within CCL has about 40 action teams. And those are teams that our members are focused on around particular topics that they're interested in and they feel have high leverage in terms of being able to advocate for carbon pricing. And our business climate leaders action team is actually the largest action team within CCL. We focus on engaging businesses in carbon pricing advocacy. We have a number of things, and we'll get to this as well, that a number of actions that businesses can take on their own or as part of trade associations or chambers of commerce. And we also meet with members of with Congress. CCL has tremendous relationships with members of Congress. We meet with all members of Congress at least twice a year in Washington and in district, including our largest annual convention or CCL conference, where we meet with almost every single member of Congress. Last year, we met with 520 out of the 535 members of Congress in a single day. So we really prize those relationships with our members of Congress, and we're continually working with them to educate them and to develop support for carbon pricing and specifically for the EICDA. We also collaborate with trade associations and business-focused NGOs, and we also work to get support from state and local leaders in our advocacy for federal carbon pricing. There's very broad support for carbon fee and dividend, carbon pricing in general, and particularly carbon fee and dividend among the economic community. Here's just a few quotes from some well-known economists, including Janet Yellen and George Shultz, conservative Greg Mankiw. And as this says, there's over 3,500 US economists have signed a statement of support, including very leading economists. And the reason for that is that economists like the fundamental premise of the bill, which I'll talk a little bit more about, which is that it's market-based. It uses the mechanisms of the market to stimulate demand for clean energy, and as opposed to regulations, which economists in general tend to favor the market forces rather than top-down regulations. So let's talk a little bit about the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. We call it the Bipartisan Climate Solution. It's the number in the House of Representatives in the US is called HR 763. And it's really focused on driving down our carbon pollution and stimulating a very broad move to a clean energy environment, which really has the potential for being a major economic boon for not only the United States but for all countries around the world. So let me talk a little bit about the specifics of the act, which is the same as I mentioned before, our carbon fee and dividend policy, which we've been advocating for a long time. The first tenet of the policy of the act is that it assesses a carbon fee on CO2 emitting sources, coal, oil, gas. It starts low, namely at $15 a metric ton, and it grows pretty quickly. And that's one of the key aspects of the effectiveness of the policy. It grows $10, a minimum of $10 a year, starting after the first year. And so what happens to that money? That generates, very quickly, it generates a lot of money. in the US or any country that implements it. And so the net revenue after a small administrative fee, the net revenue collected from the fee is allocated in equal shares every month, so in the form of monthly dividends to the American people. And the dividends, as I mentioned, are equal shares, the same share for a full share for every adult, and a half share for children up to the age of 19. So the also, by the way, a lot of times people will ask, does it only cover CO2? No, it covers other emissions as well, and most importantly, including methane. And there's a couple of details around it. I won't get into a lot of detail on it, but it does have an exception for agricultural uses, and it has a rebate for carbon capture and sequestration processes for companies that do that. And then the third part of the kind of the third leg of the stool of the policy is that there is this mechanism to ensure that the competitiveness of US businesses, again, this would be the case of any other country that implemented this for protecting their own company's competitiveness, so that imported goods will pay a border or carbon adjustment. So basically the place where the fees are assessed are as far upstream in the economy as possible. So they're assessed at the mine, at the wellhead, and in this and for goods that are coming in internationally at the border. And there is this carbon border adjustment for U.S. companies that when they're exporting to countries that don't have a equivalent carbon tax, carbon price, then they get that fee refunded. So again, it levels the playing field internationally, and that's important to garner the support of businesses. So what are the effects of the, or what would be the effect of the passage? By the way, this has not been brought to the floor for a House vote yet. That won't happen under this administration, especially since this congressional session is almost over. We are very hopeful that will be taken up for a vote next year. But the outcomes, if and when the bill is passed, or something similar to that, were studied by a group called Remy, the Regional Economic Modeling, Inc., which is a very well-known econometric organization in New England. And this study was done a few years ago, and it found some key results that after it basically measured the effect over the next, in the first 20 to 30 years after passage of the bill. And as you can see, the projection is that the carbon emissions as a percentage of 2005 levels go down at a very rapid rate. This easily exceeds the commitments that the US has made as part of the Paris Accords, and would take us all the way to a 90% reduction from 2005 levels by 2050. And you can see on the right-hand side, you can see the interval reductions along the way in 2030 and 2040. Also, the amount and the dividends per family will start. It's at the beginning when the revenues are not as high. It's quite a bit lower than this. It's about I think the first year is around $1,000 for a family of four. But by the year 10, the dividends per family of four would be $4,400, which is not insignificant for a lot of people, in our society. And in fact, one of the key things is it was always important to us to have a policy that was not regressive. And in fact, 70% of families' dividends exceed their additional costs. And these are the 70% on the lower income, the lower part of the income curve. So that's important, that the people that would pay a little bit more are wealthier people, just because wealthier people spend more spend more money on stuff and travel and so forth, where a price on carbon would have more of an impact. But even to them, it would not be a significant increase to their costs. Also, the implementation would over the first 20 years would stimulate a nearly $1.4 trillion increase in GDP, an additional 2.8 million jobs across many sectors, and also importantly, avoid well over 200,000 premature deaths because of the significant reduction in pollution. And I'm sure, as you well know, it's a significant contributor to premature deaths, particularly in frontline communities. So just to kind of summarize the key points, we strongly believe that passage of this will be effective. Most importantly, that's the whole idea, is it will be effective in reducing emissions at a rate that we need to reduce them in order to avert the worst outcomes of climate change. Creates jobs and grows the economy. It's good for people from a health point of view, and not only jobs, but also from a health point of view. It is bipartisan. I will speak to that it's bipartisan. When it was introduced, the first two sponsors, we had one Democrat and one Republican. Now we have 82 Democrats and still only one Republican. So we're still calling it bipartisan because it is. We're working very hard to increase the Republican sponsorship of it, but Republicans, for those of you who are in the US, you're, I think, quite aware that Republicans, at least in this climate right now, put themselves at significant risk to speak out too dramatically around climate legislation. However, as I mentioned, we have strong relationships with all members of Congress, and we strongly believe that we will have many more Republican sponsors once the political climate changes. And then the other important aspect is that this is a revenue neutral policy. In other words, the government doesn't keep the money. And that is a very important feature to garner bipartisan support, because many Republicans in particular are just almost allergic to programs where the government keeps a large amount of them, where it grows the government significantly. So these are the basic aspects of the bill. Certainly, there are other carbon pricing bills that have been introduced, and certainly there will be negotiations and sausage making, and we'll see what comes out in terms of what emerges as the as the preferred bill whenever that happens, and we hope that'll be next year. You all, if you are familiar with carbon pricing, you certainly, I'm sure, realize that the U.S. is hardly the sole advocator for carbon pricing. In fact, much of the rest of the world is well ahead of the U.S., including the EU, which most of the EU has had an ETS, an emissions trading system, often known as cap and trade, for some time now. It's been, it's gone, the market for the emissions, for the dividend, for the credits have gone up and down, and it's had it's kind of been gone up and down in terms of its effectiveness, but it's been certainly very helpful in terms of what they've accomplished in terms of moving to clean energy. And you see the same thing. Canada has a number of carbon pricing systems in place, as does China, Australia, New Zealand. So, so this is a policy which is growing in popularity and practice around the world. So just a few, some quick thoughts about the impact on IT companies. Well, first of all, IT companies, and that's why one of the reasons we're excited to talk with you today, and that why Mark and I we have a particular focus on IT companies. We run what's our IT sector team within Business Climate Leaders. And, we focus, one of the reasons we focus on them is because they have a huge influence. Revenues over 1.7 trillion, large number of jobs, a growing critical part of the national economy, use a huge amount of our electricity, and many companies within IT are very progressive in this front. They really care about climate change, and they're taking actions internally to address their carbon footprints. So the other thing that we wanted to point out is that carbon pricing helps to drive a move to a clean energy economy, which is a major opportunity for IT companies. Much of what happens within in the move to clean energy economy is digital. So that means, kind of the expanded Internet of Things with, with things like automated appliances and automated controls of climate systems, air conditionings and heating units and so forth. And this is the arena that IT companies play in. So it's a significant increase to their markets. So, and clean tech, software, similar kind of thing as I was talking about, they will have lots of opportunities for software in, for example, as buildings move to cleaner systems, and there'll be smart energy devices, again, kind of what I was mentioning before, and many, many others. And the other aspect of why it's good for IT companies is this extra money that's in people's pocketbooks. By 2030, it's an extra $4,400 per family, and some significant percentage of that will be spent on consumer technology. Also, many banks and insurance companies are now considering how companies are performing on a sustainability point of view, and that they reward them with lower cost of capital and insurance. Employees increasingly, younger employees increasingly, are put a lot of emphasis on the companies that they apply to. They want to see companies that are progressive in the area of addressing climate change and outspoken in terms of the need to address climate change. So it not only attracts employees, but also reduces employee turnover. Also, is the lower cost of capital. It makes it easier to justify the carbon reduction projects that perhaps have been on the table for a while for companies. Also, one of the organizations that I've worked closely with over the last 2.5 years is called the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. And we did a study as part of that work with about 15 of their member companies. And they have, I'll show you a slide that shows some of the member companies. And that study, which was done by a very well-known and a very experienced company in terms of evaluating companies' moves to reducing their carbon footprints, found that the implementation of this bill would have a minimal impact from the carbon fees, less than 1%, easily covered by, if they wanted to, by a slight increase in prices to their customers. And I think also just a similar kind of idea is that these stakeholders would be enhanced. Some studies have shown that it could increase companies' valuation by around 5% as the move to address these new market opportunities. Shareholders and financial community are demanding climate action, and as I mentioned, the impact on recruiting. So just after working with the Silicon Valley Leadership Group earlier this year, it was earlier this year, they, as an umbrella organization, took a position on HR 763, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividends Act, supporting it in principle. They do want to make sure that it integrates effectively with California's cap and trade system, but they are very supportive of the overall structure of the bill. And these are just a list of some of the member organizations, the member companies within the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. I do want to emphasize that this statement of support comes from the umbrella organization. We are working with many of these other companies to work with them to speak out or to advocate as individual companies. But right now, it's just the umbrella organization that's making this overall statement. So what can companies do? What can you and your company do in terms of advocacy? We offer a variety of advocacy opportunities. We have an IT industry declaration, which basically says we as companies within the IT industry basically talks about why we recognize that it's important to address climate change, and we support the passage of EICDA. And endorsing the bill in other ways on your website or in public statements is another way. You can help us to reach out to trade groups that you might be part of, or provide referrals to other companies. And you can also join our action team. Mark and I are always looking for and recruiting companies that are willing to get involved with our advocacy efforts. And as I mentioned, we offer a wide range of ways to do that. We try to meet companies wherever they are. A lot of companies that we start with simply want to learn about carbon pricing. They want to learn more about it, about the work that we've done, about some of the studies that we've had, and so forth, so that they can then make it an educated decision about how much advocacy they would like to do. But we would, as I said, we would absolutely welcome any partnership and look forward to hearing from any of you who are interested in that.